All right, so last week we left off with an enantiodromia, and so we're up to paragraph 628, which is relating back to this enantiodromia, and that is masculine perfection reaches a dead end, and then there's an enantiodromia back toward completeness, because, suppose that you had a household where everything was perfect and there was no conflict with your spouse and all that stuff, right? I mean, it would be like the Stepford Wives. Okay, Stepford Wives was sort of the man's ideal of what the wives should be, right? Sure, that's the anima every man is looking for. But anyway,
well, that's the old adage that you can't live with them and you can't live without them, right?
well, that's for sure. That's right. The enantiodromia works both ways.
See, I think Skip, you just pointed to the real reason for the way we treat women, misogyny and so forth. We realize we're not needed, so
We're afraid to give up our power. Did you see the movie She?
I saw part of it, yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting movie. No, it wasn't an alien. It was AI. It was an AI being, but it didn't have a body. It was just, she was always with him. She was in his cell phone or whatever, and I don't remember if he actually named her at one point, but she would fulfill all his needs, right? She'd cook dinner, she'd take care of everything, and she'd keep him company, talk to him, whatever he wanted. And she was erudite because she had access to all the knowledge of history, but there was no animal side of that, and we are animals. I mean, interestingly, I was looking, because I've been trying to work on this Symbols of Transformation group on Facebook too, and I ran into an incredible roadblock with it, because I finally got Edinger's lectures on Symbols of Transformation, which has been out of print for like 20 years, right? And oh my God, just 2 facing pages, had so many nested ideas in it that it took me 2 weeks to even unpack it at all. And so this morning I wrote little comments from paragraph 84 to 92. That's as far as I could get. And it's just so complex and stuff that I entirely missed. That only a psychotherapist would know, presumably. But are you familiar with the book?
which book? I'm sorry.
Symbols of Transformation. It's also
Is that the first or the second book?
But in 1912, he wrote this book called Psychology of the Unconscious. And throughout this book, he's basically analyzing a woman named Miss Frank Miller, who he never met. Okay, he had Janae, who was his mentor in Paris. When was that? Janae was his mentor in Paris before the turn of the century, I think. Okay, or right after the turn of the century. Okay, so Janae sent him this it was a memoir of this Miss Frank Miller. Okay, so all he had was her description of what was happening to her. And so he basically does a psychoanalysis of it from the page instead of from a human being. I mean, I've read it 5 times now, at least 3 times as psychology of the unconscious, at least twice as symbols of transformation, maybe 3 times. And I'm only now getting into it. Edinger's Fruitcake, about how Jung has to be read slowly. It's like a fruitcake, and he's a lot smarter than us. So I'm now unbundling it, but using Edinger's lectures, I go, oh my God, now I understand. But for example, there's, and for artists, this is a big deal. You might want to read it, in fact, or at least look at my notes, because, basically, Jung believed that any work of art was a reflection of the unconscious of the artist, basically. Right.
That's the whole point. I mean, that's why we were always running up to the edge and looking over, like I mentioned before. We didn't want to be designers. We wanted to be artists. And the artists have to draw. They have to draw from the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Okay, so Miss Frank Miller describes this situation where she's on a ship, and she's, I think she's like 19, and she's going on the grand tour of Europe. She's an American, but she's going to go on the grand tour of Europe, so she's writing a diary. And they get in near Italy, and the ship is crewed by Italian men, right? And so one morning, she hears one of the ship's officers singing in this Italian tenor early in the morning. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and he's singing some Italian song. And she has this sort of creative experience, we'll call it, with writing a poem. And it's called The Hymn of Creation. And so the Hymn of Creation is a really lovely poem. And so when I read it the first 5 times, I said, man, I really like this poem. What is Jung on about this poem? What's wrong with it? I couldn't understand. It was a great poem. And, it's something, I mean, I can just paraphrase it, but it's when God made sound, then he created ears to hear the sound. And then when God made visual things, he created eyes to see the things. And then he created love, and he created, our hearts to feel the love or something like that. So anyway, it's called the Hymn of Creation, right? And I said, man, I love this poem. This is a cool poem. What is Jung so upset about? Or what the heck is he saying about this? And so it turns out that what he's saying is that it's normal for a young woman of that age to have constellated the animas, right? So that she can transform her libido from her father to a man of her own age, an appropriate man for the rest of her life. And so some man comes along, or in our cases, some woman comes along that meets our image of what perfection is, and we're off to the races, right? We go get married, we have kids, and we start living our lives, right? But what Jung is saying about Frank Miller is, that's all well and good, but it stayed in the unconscious. It didn't take, okay? And so what happened was, instead of it emerging as it should have into her conscious mind and have her, take action with the ship's officer one way or another, for better or for worse, right? She unconsciously repressed it. Okay, so it was a libido that failed to launch, right? Right, it's a failure to launch. And so therefore, when it fails to launch, then it has to be replaced with something, and then it regresses to the father mind. Okay, and so then it regresses because the most powerful drive in the human being is the drive to procreate. Okay, both men and women, it's the drive to procreate. And oh, by the way, the unconscious doesn't care after that. You can do whatever you want, but mainly, it wants you to procreate. And so what happens is that you start having, that she had started to have images of the creation, okay, because it is the creation itself. Okay, that's the myth.
Instead of having a child, you're saying.
Right. Instead of coming out into life, it got repressed in the unconscious.
Came out as a poem.
Came out as a poem. It was sublimated. Now, what's happening here is
That's the word I was waiting for.
Pardon?
That's the word I was waiting for.
Sublimated.
Yeah, you kept saying refreshing.
Right.
Sublimate is not the same.
But repressing is a verb, right? I mean, somehow it's the dichotomy between animal and civilization, right? Too much civilization makes sick animals. Too much animal doesn't provide for civilization, right? And so there has to be a balance between the two. And in her case, she kind of failed to launch, which Jung is reading that out of that poem and some other things that happen.
Civilization is sublimation. That is
Right. Because the rabbit doesn't know why it runs when the hawk flies over. It just does. Right?
I don't know, but I'm scared like hell.
That's right. so anyway, I mean, I just had this experience this morning with Miss Miller's stuff from Symbols of Transformation, where I've been trying to unpack this 2 pages of Edinger's lecture, never mind Jung. I'm trying to understand Edinger's explanation of Jung. and that took 2 weeks. So it's deep stuff, and it's deep in the unconscious, and so again, it's like the Russian dolls, right? All of us have just layers of reasons. I mean, the reasons why the 4 of us, when Des is here, she told me she wasn't going to be here because of the holiday, but I don't know why I'm here every week. You know, I know consciously that I get some positive reinforcement out of it, right? But I don't think any of us could probably unpack it in our own minds, truly, okay?